Hello and welcome to another spoiler episode of Umineko. This video will be covering parts 3 through 5 of my Let's Play of episode 4. As we dig further into Anji's different parallel threads going on in this episode. There will be full spoilers in this video. Do not watch, do not continue to listen unless you've played the whole game, because it will not make any sense to you and will be incredibly spoilery. Content warnings in this video for discussions of child abuse, child neglect. There are particular sections where that's addressed, so I'll put notes on the description and the timestamps to indicate where that is. And also just a note that there's very vague, broad Higurashi spoilers in here. Just a couple spots. One about the existence of a late game character, and one about the nature of the metafiction in Higurashi. We begin with Okonogi, which, because I played Umineko first, when I saw him in Higurashi, had a very funny moment of going, "You!" And pretty early on, we get a funny demonstration, especially if you've not played Higurashi before, of how Burn Castell's miracles can work, how she finds a unique but plausible situation that leads to a particular result that she intends that is possible, even if unlikely, that you can get to by hunting through various fragments. One thing about this that's funny, now that I have played Higurashi, is that it fits more in the Umineko canon in some ways of, you could simply believe what Anji says, that she knew that they were doing construction and that she could fall somewhat gracefully. And to an extent, you also need to have a double-think situation here where you go, did Anji half know this and also half not care if it didn't work out? Anji's someone who is very willing to gamble her life, and unlike previous people who've talked about gambling their lives, Anji seems pretty ready to gamble her life because she doesn't value it. We've talked about Kinzo putting his life up for the roulette. We've talked about George and how he would sacrifice his life for his love. But those are people who do value their lives, in a sense at least. It can maybe be read ambiguously for them too, obviously. But with Anji, she, at the very least, presents as so depressed and disaffected and disengaged that she might simply be saying, well, either this works or it doesn't, and either outcome is fine by me. It's kind of antithetical to gambling, because when you gamble, you're invested because you want a particular outcome. You're putting up something that you do value with the hope that you'll get something more valuable. Anji's flipping a coin and going, well, I might just fall, but okay. If I don't fall, I'm not even particularly invested in surviving this. I guess if I survive the fall, I'll believe this witch and go along with her. And like I said before, this is a thread I will tease out as we go, but there's almost a sense to me that Anji branches in this moment, and one version of Anji gracefully descends to the ground and decides to investigate the witch, and one version of Anji goes to be part of the meta game that Battler is playing in. And one of those is the girl who fell and didn't die, and then one of those is a girl who flew, or the girl who didn't survive the fall. I don't know if we're going to get anything more conclusive about this. I also don't think it needs to be particularly conclusive about this, but it's an interesting beat I will probably come back to, especially because I found all of the Anji stuff was a little bit nebulous my first time through, so I'm kind of grasping it a bit better this time. There's some interesting conflict at play with Okonogi as a character in this section too. It's interesting how he introduces the phrase, without love it cannot be seen, to her. I don't know, in terms of the quote-unquote real world events, if that might be a line specifically in Beatrice's writings for the first and second games, or if this is kind of just a thematic connection with how people have talked in other episodes and with now. But Okonogi being a person to say that and to give the seed of that idea to Anji is interesting. Not that he is giving the seed of that idea to Anji, because Maria is teaching this lesson to Anji. Whether Anji is learning it or not is a different question. But he brings this phrase to Anji. This is the central lesson Anji needs to learn that she has not grasped and does not quite understand at this moment. And also he's being manipulative. He is in general in this situation doing his best to maneuver both Anji and the Sumideras into such a situation as where he can remain in control of the Ashuramiya group. Now again, obviously, as with anything in Umineko, you've got to read things a little bit ambiguously, and you can't be too definitive about people and their motivations, but there's a pretty clear reading in this section where he is a person who was in control of the Ashuramiya group when Eva was alive, and her death has caused a power struggle that is only exacerbated by the fact that Anji is waffling. Because he is not invested in Anji in particular, so much as he is invested in having a leader in place that stabilizes things for him to just manage the company he's trying to manage. And so he ends up playing two sides because he doesn't know how this weird struggle between Anji and the Sumideras is going to pan out, so he needs to try and appease both of them simultaneously without overplaying his hand on either side. And yet, he's doing all this maneuvering and he is giving Anji a real and valuable lesson about being able to see the good in people and see the optimistic and more sincere interpretations of people, and give up on her cynical assertions about Eva that she is unwilling to let go. And obviously Okonogi has a better view of Eva, and he presents reasons why he doesn't think it makes sense that Eva would be the culprit. And his reasons are pretty valid, but Anji still ignores them because to Anji they are not evidence. They are not sufficient enough. And there are enough holes that maybe there's wiggle room around his evidence. But to him it's enough. And not, in my opinion, because he particularly loved Eva as much as he was happy with that narrative of events and didn't feel the need to keep digging beyond it. But he wants Anji to be able to find the same piece for his own ends, but in a way that would be beneficial to Anji. And being honest, I think there is a version of this where if Anji is able to help him stabilize the Ashuramiya group, he could be a good friend to her. I'm talking about him being manipulative in the situation and playing people against each other and lying and being dishonest, because that is quite clearly happening with how he gives Anji some information and the Sumidera some information, but not all of the picture in either case. But at the end of the day, whether or not he lies to Anji is different to Anji being able to have a person she can talk to, which he clearly is. She wouldn't be here talking to him at all if she didn't think there was anything he could give her, anything he could offer, anything she could gain from talking to him about this situation. He sets her up with the ability to go investigate the Ashuramiya stuff. He's doing it in the hopes that he can then just have her find whatever piece she needs so that she can take over and let things run smoothly from then on. But at the end of the day, he's still just giving her the thing she's looking for. And trying to decipher whether that's a true or a sincere friendship without any kind of ulterior motives is not particularly important, as opposed to trying to just discern, can he be good for her? Can he be beneficial to Anji in her life? Because I think this is a useful way in which the Sumideras are a contrast, because they are quite clearly just bad for Anji. It's not simply that they seem to want money and power and seem to want to control Anji for their purposes. It goes beyond that, where I couldn't even put together a coherent narrative or defense of why she might be better off going with them. Anji's clearly a lonely girl, lacking a relationship and lacking a family, especially the lack of family she had with Ava is even now gone. Like Bern Castell being unable to find a fragment in which any of the Ashuramiya family members return, besides Ava, I just simply can't find a fragment in which you could say that the Sumideras have a way to improve Anji's place in life. They simply do not align in that way. And I just don't think the alternative interpretation exists here or anywhere else they're ever in the game. I maybe am forgetting scenes where it's presented in another light, but they pretty much just straight up don't seem to be a positive influence ever. And so, say what you want about Okonogi and his machinations and his lies, at the very least, he seems to be able to give Anji things that are good for her and are helpful, even if she's not always taking them on board, and even if they're not always strictly for her own sake. And this comes to fruition in an interesting way where Anji realizes, oh, I didn't trust Okonogi, who had set me up an escape route that would be very convenient and would have avoided me having to jump down several flights, 2 flights, some distance. And she has a moment where she does genuinely realize, oh, if I'd trusted a person, things would have gone better. And obviously, she can't trust literally everyone, and she can't fully trust him, or shouldn't necessarily fully trust him in all instances, blah blah blah. But at the same time, this is a very clear indication of like, yeah, I mean, you just would have been better off if you believed him. And then towards the end of this section, we get Anji talking to Bern Castell, where Anji's now wondering what even her mission is, considering the fallibility of truth, the fungibility of truth. And I like a specific interaction where Anji says, as long as the truth isn't denied, it keeps its form. To which Bern Castell says, that's right, as long as truth isn't observed, it keeps its form. Which has a fun discrepancy, where Anji is still phrasing this almost as if there's a quantifiable real truth, and that a truth exists but can be shot down by another truth that the truth can change its form once it's been denied, and then a more real truth or a further truth, another truth, gets formed in its place. Whereas Bern Castell is more suggesting that observing truth simply changes it. No matter what you do, no matter your intent, no matter how it existed before and what observations you bring to it, you are changing the truth. It's similar to Heisenberg's uncertainty principle, that we actually cannot observe exactly where an electron is because our means of observing it actually affect where it is. You cannot view it without changing it. And so, by looking, you are taking an active participation that changes the world. It changes the state of the thing you're looking at. In the same way, you can't just indifferently notice, acknowledge, or engage with truth. To engage with truth at all is to address that truth, modify it, update it, configure it. Something happens in the moment where you have that engagement with the truth. And this is part of what the broader lesson Anji needs to learn is, because Anji, even in this conversation, I believe still has a notion of truth being difficult to understand, but there still ultimately being a truth. Because to Anji, there are still physical facts of what happened on the island. But Anji underestimates the extent to which those physical facts are fungible too. At the end of the day, Beatrice is a person. But what does Anji make of the idea of Beatrice? What does Anji make of the idea of Shannon and Canon? What does Anji make of the idea of Toya? And all of this is stuff Anji is not prepared for in this moment, Because at the end of the day, Anji is still thinking in the notion of, in the cat box, there is a cat that is either dead or alive. And obviously, once we open the box, we have the answer. Because opening the box leads only to one answer. But Anji is still thinking, there is a time of death we could determine. There is still a moment, a truth that we can find in there. We just need to dig. And Bern Castell doesn't believe the same thing as Anji. She's motivating Anji to do this because Bern Castell wants clues about the box. Bern Castell wants to look inside the box that's been opened and then get a nose in to try and untangle the premise of the game board that she is confused by. Then we have a brief stop over on the island as we yet again go through the motions of everyone acting as if Kinzo is still alive. There's multiple lines where this feels true, but this one, more than the previous three, feels like people are not even that committed to the bit. There's multiple situations where it feels like people are being more overtly hostile and snippy and making very clear allusions to things without even feeling like they need to do the proper rigmarole of going, oh, of course Kinzo's alive, he's just so busy. Apart from Natsuhi, who will never not commit to the bit, they could have Kinzo's corpse on the table and she'd be like, this is actually his long-lost twin. The real Kinzo is so distraught about this discovery that he has locked himself up in his study. And the reason that's interesting in this case is because Kyrie senses this and senses the kind of deadlock stalemate that the siblings have found themselves in. And so she ends up kind of forcing a different tactic, which is fundamentally not that different because she is effectively blackmailing Kraus without explicitly blackmailing him. They are doing the more quote-unquote polite version of events where she's effectively saying, well, if you just give us money, we just won't look into this thing that we all know is true already. And she provides a framework of how things can be done. In a funny way, she's doing a similar thing to what a lot of people have said that the epitaph was, where it's not that Kinzo actually wanted anyone in particular to solve that epitaph, it's that Kinzo wanted a specific person to have a mechanism to become the new head by solving that epitaph. And so you provide a framework where you're making it seem as if there's a clear and fair logical system for a thing to occur, but it's designed such that you're basically saying, I already know what I want to happen, so I am just setting up conditions that will mean the thing I want happens, but I can say I just did a fair thing of, I just put out the epitaph. Anyone could have solved that. In the same way, Kyrie is just saying, I just think it's reasonable that, of course, we want to acknowledge you as the caretaker. And obviously the caretaker has such a burden of responsibility. Maybe we should get that responsibility ironed out in concrete writing. And again, setting things up such that there's a specific trigger, because the siblings have kind of come in with a plan of just saying, hey, if you give us money, we'll stop poking at this thing. But Kraus is too stubborn and honestly a little bit too stupid to let that just be the plan. He also technically could get that money, but would certainly struggle to, so he does have a vested interest in attempting to avoid it. But by reframing things without technically changing the situation or condition all that much, I mean, Kyrie is still blackmailing him using the same information and attempting to get the same result, but she's managed to reframe things such that Kraus ends up being a little bit more cornered, and it ends up being a little bit more binary and direct how they will act on the information if he continues to refuse their requests for money. Because he's trying to stall, because ultimately he thinks eventually his finances will work out. He's only pretending Kinzo's still alive for as long as he can avoid having it revealed just how much of his money he's been losing. he needs time, they need money, and they need money now. But their threats are not empty so much as they don't get money now if they actually act on them. If they push him now, then there's going to be lengthy court mess, and the family name's going to be dragged through the mud. There'll be a whole host of problems that they don't want either. And so Kyrie is forcing a little bit more immediacy into the issue. And I'm kind of curious if this is thematically going to be relevant through the end of this episode, because in some ways it does certainly parallels the machinations about money and the political maneuvering, or the factional maneuvering, I guess I should say, that is happening with Anji in her timeline. But in terms of how the headship stuff goes in this episode, it's going to go a completely different way, and I am looking forward to unpacking how the Kinzo stuff goes. And we get the introduction of the Blue Truth. As a counterpart to the Red Truth, it's interesting thematically the ways in which the Red Truth, as blunt, objective fact lacking in any nuance or context, the Blue Truth is more like the kind of narrative threads we've talked about before, of a kind of story you can put together to explain disparate information, and how you can have many. Battler talks about the best way, from his point of view, of fighting with the Blue Truth is to make a bunch of Blue Truths, throw them all at the wall and see what sticks, which is a silly way to try to make sense of a situation. It's probably a reasonable strategy, I suppose, but it is also demonstrative of how non-singular the Blue Truth is. The Red Truth is supposed to be an objective singular fact that is indisputable and cannot be cut in two. The Red Truth is just correct. You don't undo it. Even if technically the Red Truth is deeply misleading. For instance, the Red Truth that says there are no more than 18 people on the island is technically undermined by the there are no more than 16 people on the island truth. But it's not wrong. It's kind of atomic in a sense. You can't split it further. Even though that's also not true of atoms, but that's neither here nor there. The Blue Truth, however, is made to be pulled apart. It is specifically a thing you say with the idea that it has to be countered. And only if it is not countered do you then take it as truth, even though that doesn't actually make it truth. The Red Truth itself is innately true. It is innately, objectively accurate. The Blue Truth is a supposition that, if it does not get torn down, gets accepted as true. It is a story. It is a version of events. The idea of Ava as the witch, that is a truth that does not get torn down because no one completely disproves it. No one offers a clear and objective reason why that's not possible. When Okonogi says, well, it doesn't make a lot of sense for her to do that for X, Y, and Z reasons, Andre's response is, effectively, none of those are a Red Truth, so I don't need to care about any of them. No one in the real world can ever use the Red Truth to say, Ava cares so much about her husband and son that she would simply never allow this to happen, let alone do it herself. Without access to that, it's a lot easier to have Blue Truths that persist and don't get cut down with evidence. It creates an interesting triangle with the Golden Truth that will be rarely deployed and little discussed, to be honest, so I'm looking forward to that being actively used later. But in this moment, I like the dichotomy between the Red Truth and the Blue Truth. Naming it the Blue Truth is a little bit funny when, again, it is set up to explicitly be disproven in a way that the Red Truth simply never is. Even if the Red Truth can just as easily be flipped around, as Battler so often is trying to do. And we move on then to part 5, where we're going back to Rosa and Maria. There's a very brief scene of the Onrakanjima relationship between Rosa and Maria, And I think the way the narration is written here is very telling in how Higurashi is not trying to say that there's nothing wrong in this dynamic or that people have no responsibility to intervene. He's underlining the ways in which people will rationalize non-intervention. Because we have a scene of Maria being dried because she's been out in a storm, which she did because she was obeying to the word her orders from her abusive mother, who was frustrated with her, and also it's pretty clear that Maria is a child with some degree of neurodivergence who maybe takes instructions more literally than you would expect from a different kind of child. And despite that, the narration describes it as, Rosa certainly had gotten a little emotional and angry, but Maria's stubborn whim was probably more to blame. The cousins, who had seen that exchange, were relieved to see that mother and child were close to each other again. The idea that it's Maria's stubborn whim and that Rosa was being a little emotional. I will remind you at this point, the cousins did not see Rosa getting mad at Maria. The cousins saw Rosa hitting Maria, to the point that Battler thought to intervene and George made him not. This is pretty awful. Again, as I've said before, these are children. The extent to which they could intervene and help is obviously up in the air somewhat, but it's still awful to see the thing that Anji is afraid of being deployed in this case. When Maria talks about how her mother does love her and talks about the good times she has with Sakutaro and her mother, those are not wrong. Those are tragic in a sense, but it would be wrong to criticize Maria for that impulse, because Maria is simply doing what she can to get by in her life and to find happiness in the life she has been dealt. This is the thing Anji is afraid of, where other people rationalize Rosa's behavior to give her excuses. Again, whether or not they could literally stop Rosa is one question, but the idea that they decide to abdicate any even blame for Rosa and that they're willing to blame Maria, this is some shit. This is where, even if there was narration of Battler saying, oh, if I tried to confront Rosa, she's not going to listen to me and I might just make things worse, there is a marked difference in understanding that what Rosa's doing is wrong, even if you cannot fix it. But instead, all the kids say, oh, this is good. All is right in the world. Maria did a bad thing, but it's okay now. And to me, the point of this is not just to underline that, but to also show that this is why Anji so fiercely fights against Maria's positive interpretation. Because I do think there's an argument to be made for the idea that being too positive, only looking at things with love, always taking an optimistic and charitable read of situations, does lead to harm. There is a harm that comes from that is a material danger, that is a material problem, that goes beyond just being pessimistic about things. Obviously, Anji has taken it to too far an extreme, but at the same time, this is illustrative of why she would have that kind of caution and why her skepticism of Maria's magic is not thoroughly unwarranted, even if she is misapplying it. And it's certainly poignant that right there, the servant helping them is Canon, who is much more pessimistic, who looks at them blank-faced and bows and leaves after being thanked. He knows what's going on in this scene. He's not giving Rosa this out, even if he is not taking any particular action in this moment, because he has no power to do so. And then, of course, Anji steps away from the table because she is unwilling to passively watch this interaction. And she has a fun conversation with Maria, where I like that Anji is technically imbuing more intelligence into Maria, more like adult intelligence than Maria would have had when she died, but still using it to basically illuminate Maria's point of view, because of the exchange where Maria says, "Why do you think I'm not happy, Anji?" Which Anji says, "Think about it objectively," because she thinks she's just factually correct about this, to which Maria says, "By objectively, you mean from your viewpoint, right?" Which is a great comeback and is a huge element to this whole theme in Umineko about the idea of objectivity being mostly fake and mostly being a way for people to assert that their own belief is backed and therefore the correct one. And then, of course, Maria talks about specifically the idea of future truths overwriting previous ones. And in this moment, this is particularly pointed because this Maria is trying to tell Anji, "Hey, please don't make my life entirely tragic. I feel like I was happy, but because I'm gone, you could write the story of what my life was and say that it was just tragedy." In theory, because Maria does not actually have any presence to dictate what her truth was anymore, Anji could just take over, and she could just assert the truth that Maria's life was. Maria has no recourse. And given that all of the Ashura-miyas are dead, all of the Ashura-miyas are dead at this point, bar Anji, there's an important reading you have to make of the events of this game and how the people are depicted. You have to remember that they're all dead. Their legacy has effectively ended. Most of them don't even have their kids left. So realistically, when you think about these people, there is no material harm that they themselves could cause anymore, and you have to instead think about these people in terms of how they will be remembered and how their actions will be carried forward, how their legacies will persist without being materially present. And so in the same way that you shouldn't paint Maria's life as tragedy, continuing to paint Ava as a witch is kind of sad because she's not fully at fault for what happened, and yet she's had to bear the brunt of it. And even Anji still believes that, and without Anji changing her mind and painting over a new truth, that will simply be the truth of Ava. We go back to another scene with Maria and Rosa, and nothing illustrates the depths of Maria's neglect better than the fact that Maria knows all the coping mechanisms and all of the tricks needed to hide her neglect from other people. Not only does Maria take the initiative in apologizing for asking about a promise her mother made, where her mother is clearly fucked up, in many ways, but Maria then also basically rattles off, "Here's the ways in which I'll make sure that no one's aware that you've left me alone for the weekend. Including, I'll visit different shops, I already know where the money is, I'll make sure that I'm hygienic, that I eat food, that I'm not outdoors late at night by myself." She has clearly gotten a lot of practice at this, and I also get the sense that some of these are things that Rosa has come home and said, "You went to the same shop 3 times and this dude asked what's up. Don't do that, that's stupid." These are all things Maria is listing off as, "Don't worry, I'll be a good girl." These are all things Rosa has said of, "Hey, do this so no one notices what I'm doing. Do this so that I get to remain abusive and neglectful without being caught." Which is all going to be very relevant when we have a social worker later. We'll talk about that scene when that comes. And you once more establish the classic abusive dynamic where Maria feels like if anything goes wrong, it's her fault. She's beholden to make it up to her mother to apologize quickly, and Rosa reinforces this by saying, "Great, you doing all those things makes you a good girl. I'll even buy you a physical reward that's supposed to demonstrate my affection that I'm not offering you this weekend. Because I am not even working like I claimed. I'm just going off for a date because I just don't have the capacity to deal with you as a child." Oh, Rosa. She doesn't even stay on the phone long. She just really quickly makes sure Maria is going to do her coping mechanisms and then says bye. There's a longer conversation to be had about where Rosa is mentally that we'll have to get to later in this episode. I think the more of Maria's backstory we have under our belt, the more whole that conversation can be, even if I mostly know what kind of a shit I'm going to be calling her. Also, I already mentioned the ways in which Sakutaro argues in favor of Rosa and kind of acts as Rosa's advocate on her behalf, but there's some real tragedy in the foreshadowing of Sakutaro saying, I'll always be here. I'll always be here by your side. Knowing that Rosa is by her own hands going to shred the tie that Maria has to feeling like her mother loves her. And it's just going to be in a stupid rage. It's not even going to be... Again, we'll get there. There's a quiet moment too that I think is worth drilling in on, where after we get the narration, we get the story of Maria's night with Sakutaro, the fun party she has, and all sorts of hijinks they get up to. She writes a letter for her mother where she's very grateful and wants to share her mother's happiness, and she gives Sakutaro the red muffler. Anji and Maria then talk about it, and Anji is fully in a this is awful mode. She's like, this is sad, I'd be mad. Maria acknowledges. She says, yeah, it was sad. Because even if Rosa had remembered, Maria wouldn't be able to go to the movies with her. So Maria is not even trying to do the inverse of what Anji does. Maria is not trying to claim that there is a complete, perfect happiness here. She's willing to acknowledge a place in which she is sad. She's willing to acknowledge that this is a thing that did upset her. And we see that through the story, because she does cry, and Sakutaro cheers her up. But Anji's not satisfied with that. Because then Maria says, but at least we had a fun pajama party. Surely you can acknowledge that was nice. And then Anji's like, no, that wasn't fun. There's no way that would be fun. You just messed around to distract yourself from your sadness. And this is where Maria pushes back a lot more, like, no, I had a fun time. That was real. Just like the sadness was real, so was this. But Anji's only accepting the parts that make sense to her, and then rejecting the parts that she thinks must be lies. And again, we're going to see this again and again. We're going to see this again and again with Anji, as she continues to only latch on to things that support her pessimistic interpretations. And of course, the moment with the ticket stub basically serves as a parallel to the moment of Maria being dried, where the cousins all rationalize that Maria's stubbornness was what was at fault, as opposed to Rosa's neglect. Because again, we see where Maria does something that is 100% purely unobjectionable. Maria picks up a piece of paper that falls, and Rosa slaps her. Because Rosa, on some level, is disgusted with herself and what she's doing and doesn't want any acknowledgement of it. She doesn't even without Maria giving the slightest hint of suspicion, doubt, questioning, because even in the aftermath, Maria's just like, I'm sure this was fine and I do not need to interrogate it. But Rosa immediately slaps her, to which Maria apologizes. Just like at the start, Maria says sorry. Because Maria cannot conceive of the idea that what her mother has done is wrong. So she immediately rationalizes it as her own mistake. Again, just reiterating this abusive dynamic. And Rosa doesn't say anything in this moment. She simply leaves. Because, again, Rosa is, on some level, aware of what she is doing to her child and how bad it is. It's not unusual that she comes home and is expecting her child to be upset and preemptively weary and then surprised to find her actually happy. The thing that is obviously contentious in this section is, on one hand, this is classic abusive parent behavior. Love bombing is a thing. The push and pull of being abusive and then apologizing for it, feeling the abusive person feeling guilt about what they have done, but not taking steps to actually remove the causes of harm, change their behavior at a fundamental level. They will buy presents, they will apologize, they will feel bad and feel the guilt, but will continue this cycle. They have not fundamentally changed the dynamic. But at the same time, when you are Maria, when you are a child, This is an indication of the affection your mother has for you. And in the desert, when you have an oasis, you just take that oasis. You will take this affection. When the good mama is there, you just have to grab it for all you can. And that's not wrong of Maria to do. And Anji continually asserting that that's wrong is one of her major flaws that you will not be getting over in this episode. From what I remember, at least. That is going to do it for this episode. We've a lot more Maria and Anji to dig into as we continue on. And we will be getting to some Beatrice stuff soonish, I believe. But until then, thank you for watching another spoiler video, and see you next time.